I want to take a look at a particular segment of the electorate to show you how the circumstances of this forthcoming election have shifted over time. You know, we do a lot of looking at the national polls at the top of the show or earlier in the show. We looked at how Kamala Harris has her first full point lead over Trump nationally among all voters. We've looked at individual states, although we haven't looked at Florida. So what I want to do here is in a moment, we're going to talk about Florida. But first, I want to talk about a particular group of voters, non-college educated white voters, non-college educated white voters. There is a report from yesterday from CNN, from Harry Enton, and it is about exactly that group. This is really interesting. Let's take a look.
So, Harry, we know, obviously, you look at the overall polls, you see these swing state polls, the ones over the weekend from CNN did stand out. We'll see if that's really where this goes. But you found something very interesting in terms of one group that stands out.
White working class voters, white voters without a college degree. That is Donald Trump's core group. That was the reason why he was able to break down that giant blue wall, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, in the Great Lakes. And look at their support now versus where we were a few months ago when the matchup was between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Look.
Okay, so let me just make sure, because I want to make sure people who are listening understand what we're looking at. In May, Trump led non-college educated white voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin by 25. Trump had a 25-point lead among that group in May. That lead now has shrunk to only 14 points. To put it another way, Trump has experienced 11 points of shrinkage since May among non-college educated white voters. That is a massive shift.
Donald Trump still leads, but look at that margin. It has shrunk significantly. It was 25 points back in May. It is now 14 points now here in August, nearly been sliced by half. Those numbers that Harris is putting up amongst that group right now are actually slightly better than Joe Biden did 4 years ago amongst those voters in those key states. Those are the types of numbers that Kamala Harris needs to put up in order to win. And of course, Joe Biden was like, I don't want to drop out of the race because I'm not sure that Kamala Harris can break in with this group, but it turns out she absolutely can.
Which is fascinating because originally when they started, right, it was an immediate map expansion. They started looking at Georgia, North Carolina even, not giving up, but it seemed like sort of accepting that conventional wisdom. Correct. And now it's fascinating that may not be the case. So also the economy. When we look at that, we just were talking about that. That's an issue Trump has been extremely strong on. Is that changing?
It is. I mean, again, look, we're still looking at Trump having a clear advantage amongst white working class voters in, the Great Lake battleground states. But again, the margin is shrinking, and elections are all about margins. You see it shrinking. You had a 36-point advantage in May. It's now down to 24 points here in August. These are the types of numbers that Kamala Harris needs to put up. And more than that, it's about the economy. This is also a change election, and it's also about changes.
Okay, and then let's pause here and I'll describe this one for you. What this one shows is that, and we talked about this as well, there is a real big change to the conventional wisdom that Republicans are always better on the economy. We know that the statistics point to actually they're not, but it's believed by voters that Republicans are better stewards of the economy. In this polling scenario, non-college educated white voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Trump had a 36-point lead on who's better for the economy. That lead has dropped by a third to 24, from 36 to 24. At the end of the day, all of these are just signals about what might happen in November. But if you're looking at the trends, it's hard to feel like these aren't trends that are very, very favorable to Kamala Harris. So that's that. Let's now talk a little bit about Florida. Right now, we are seeing candidates do whatever it takes to win your vote, and how the media chooses to cover certain stories, if at all, can completely shape your perspective of those candidates. But our sponsor, Ground News, is an awesome resource at a time like this. With their Vantage plan, I get access to what's called their blind spot feed that shows me stories that can be easily missed. For instance, I'm looking here at Ground News' summary about Trump distancing himself from Project 2025 amid its rising controversy, something we've been talking about. Ground News provides a great summary of the situation based on over 100 articles that Ground News found reporting on it. And Ground News shows me that almost no conservative news outlets are covering the story. Not a surprise. Ground News shows us that the right-wing outlets only report on how Trump is denying involvement with the project, while the center and left outlets are actually giving context on Trump's connections to the movement of Project 2025. Every story comes with this visual breakdown of the political biases and ownership of the reporting news outlets, which is really important to know as well. Go to ground.news/Pacman or scan my QR code for 40% off the same unlimited access Vantage plan that I use.